This is Dr. Charles Parker, and you're listening to Core Brain Journal. It's a place where I connect both fresh discoveries and interesting different perspectives from advanced mind science with the realities of real people and everyday life down on Main Street.
Well, welcome aboard, folks. Here we are, Dr. Charles Parker, one more time at Core Brain Journal, and we are very pleased to welcome a guest tonight who is interested in some topics that many of our listeners are interested in, myself highly included in that list, because my whole life has been tied up with time, the meaning of time. And we have Anthony Hamilton joining us from downtown British Columbia. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And Anthony, welcome aboard. We're happy to have you on board here.
Thank you so much, Chuck. It's great to be here.
So a brief introduction, first of all. Ladies and gentlemen, we're very pleased to welcome our two new sponsor partners to the Core Brain Journal family. First of all, the compassionate and caring nonprofit James Barry Robinson Child and Adolescent Residential Treatment Center right here in beautiful downtown Norfolk, with an evolved set of programs that help define and redefine childhood and family evolution for those families. And then we have our clinical friends, Direct Health Access Laboratory, DHA Labs, and they're just outside of Chicago. Remember, folks, if they can serve professionals in Nigeria, they can help you out in Fargo. So stay tuned. I'll tell you more about them later. It won't be so rough an intro. So here we are, Anthony. I'm going to do a little intro on you, and I'm going to try my reading success with you. We'll see how it goes. And okay. The intro is not the important thing, Anthony. The deal is what we're talking about, as you know. So he's a retired professor of communication, currently living in Victoria, BC, British Columbia, Canada. Currently, he's speaking. He's got a coaching private practice with clients. He's conducting seminars and events based on information in his new book, Mind, Time, and Power. It's going to be very interesting. Using the hidden power of your mind to heal your past and create your future is the subtitle. His passion in life is to help people make meaningful changes in their lives by employing easy to learn, yet very powerful mental tools and techniques. The book details a new model of consciousness based on quantum physics, which says that the mind acts as a kind of time machine, which is able to connect with and gather information from the past and future equally. So understanding and using this connection to both past and future is his current focus and the bulk of his professional life. So, Anthony, I'm looking forward to talking about it. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do. That was kind of a hasty summary. Tell us a little bit about yourself personally, and then we'll get into this very interesting conversation.
Well, thank you very much, Chuck. Yeah, I was born in England. I moved to Canada with my family when I was 2, and I lived in Nova Scotia on the East Coast because my father was in the Navy. And when I was 10, I had an experience where I fell out of a tree and knocked myself out. And during that experience, I had what you might call a dream, an out-of-body experience, some kind of, it's hard to put words to it because we don't have any language to talk about this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But basically, it was like I was in a helicopter looking down at myself at the age of 32. And I knew what my whole life was going to be about from that point on. I knew that I was going to be teaching about happiness and success, was going to be writing books and helping people live better lives. So I don't know whether the dream lasted or this experience lasted, 10 seconds or 30 seconds or what it was, but it was so vivid. I mean, it was really an epiphany for me, and arguably the most important experience of my entire life, because I've been working with it and working on it now to try and understand it ever since the age of 10. And I just turned 70, so that's 60 years.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kept me going for that length of time.
Well, it's interesting how time changes when a person's in a traumatic moment. It is relative in that sense, because a person can have just a few seconds and think that it's a much longer period of time. And on the other hand, one of the things that Freud said, and I've studied Freud for a long period of time, one of the things that's true that I've seen in the practice, he says there is no time in the unconscious.
Exactly. And, in Buddhism, which is something that I've been reading about for, I guess, half of my life, they talk about enlightenment is like a flash of lightning on a dark night.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've ever been outside at night and seen a lightning flash, you know what I'm talking about. All of a sudden, you can just see everything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what this dream was like. That's what this experience was like for me. So I started doing some research at around the age of 12, because I thought right from the very beginning, I thought that this dream was somehow real. It wasn't some kind of wouldn't this be nice if I was doing this idea. It was a true glimpse of my future. That's what I always felt. So I started 2 lines of research. The first one was, how is it possible to get information from the future? And the second one was, what does it take to be successful and happy? Because that's what I was supposed to be teaching people. So I started off, reading about people in the Bible who could predict dreams and interpret dreams and things like that. And I thought, well, that's fine for them, but I'm not a prophet, And then I started reading in my teens about people like Nostradamus and Edgar Cayce, the American psychic, and I thought, well, that's good for them, but I'm not a psychic. I'm just an ordinary person, and I always had the idea, the belief, that whatever happened to me must be so normal that happens to all kinds of people, but they just don't notice it. So eventually, I figured out that the principles of success were things like, perseverance and goal setting and visualizing and affirmations and persistence and all this kind of stuff. And when I got to reading about Einstein and his ideas of time and space and quantum mechanics, I realized that as far as physics is concerned, the idea that you can get information from the past or the future equally is something that they accept scientifically. So it started to make sense to me that it was possible to get information from the future, but I just didn't know how it would happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so the turning point for me came when I was about 27, I guess, and I took a course in mind power. And I learned about visualizing, affirmations, goal setting, and most importantly, meditation. And it turns out that meditation is really the key, because meditation is about focusing your mind. And of course, there's all different kinds of meditation. But what I was doing was meditating on achieving my goals and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So at some point, I realized that I had a really negative attitude about my future, or I should say about my past, Even though I was smart, I pretty well failed out of high school. I had a lot of trouble with the teachers, and I was a bit of a rebel, And so my teens and my early 20s were pretty miserable. I was depressed. I was overweight. I was smoking. I got into drugs, and I was drinking too much. And so by the time I got to be around 30, my life was a real mess. And so taking this meditation course, this mind power course, really straightened me out. And so when I realized that I had such a negative attitude about my childhood, I thought, well, I'm doing this 20-minute visualization exercise anyway, because I've been doing this meditation now for 6 months every day, didn't miss a day. And so I thought, well, I must have had some good experiences in my past. I just can't remember them. So because I was doing the meditation every day, I started to go back and try and find some positive experiences in my past. And it took a few days. I remember 3 or 4 days, but eventually I remembered when I was a kid, I liked playing baseball. So I thought, well, that was a happy time. So the next day I went back 20 minutes and I went back to that baseball game, and I started to try and remember more and more information about it. And I remember I did this for about 2 months. So we're talking 20 minutes a day, visualizing and meditating every day for 20 minutes and trying to rebuild my memory of this year when I was living in Nova Scotia and playing baseball.
Okay, hold just a second, Anthony, because I want to let's tease this apart a little bit, because I know our listeners are thinking about what are you actually doing. Take a little more time with this because it's so interesting. Are you sitting in a chair? Are you in a Zen posture? Did you do some breathing before you got to this point, or did you take yourself into that meditative state and then start thinking about this? How did all that work?
Well, basically, this course that I took said you should do 20-minute visualization every day. So that's what I started doing. Because, like I said, I was desperate. My life was going down the drain.
So it was really just a straight visualization. You were thinking about things, and I got you. Thank you.
I just sat down, closed my eyes, and this course that I took had a whole series of visualization exercises. So you would start off doing things like imagining a square, and then imagining a triangle, and then changing it from red to green to blue. And then you'd imagine things like a seed in the ground germinating and turning into a plant. Mm-hmm. So that's basically what it was. And over a period of about 6 months, I got pretty good at visualizing, and I'm sure the meditation got pretty deep. I was really focused internally and not noticing much of what was going on around me. Mm-hmm. And I was just sitting in a chair in my living room, And so eventually it was an amazing experience going through this exercise of trying to rebuild this memory. Because after, like I said, about 2 months I was doing this, I got to remember all my friends' names. I remembered their parents' names. I remembered their pets, the kind of cars that the parents drove. I remembered some of their addresses, some of their phone numbers. It was amazing. And again, in Eastern philosophy, they talk about enlightenment is like taking the dirt off a mirror. You clean the dust off a mirror so you can see clearly. And that's exactly what this meditation was like. It was like every time I did it, I remembered more and more stuff. Mm-hmm. And one day I remembered after this baseball game, some friends of mine went out, climbed this tree, and I fell out of the tree and knocked myself out and had this dream. Mm-hmm. And here I am sitting in Vancouver at the time, woke up out of this meditation, and it was like a whack on the side of the head. And I said to myself, I just had the same dream, but I had it from the other end. Mm. And so for the first time, because like I say, studying physics and everything, I realized that it's possible for information to move through time. So I thought, that's what it is. Memory is not a recording, which I had always thought. Memory is a connection. And I'm now connected to that 10-year-old, and that explained why the 10-year-old was connected to me, and all this information went through this connection between these two times.
Okay, now let me ask you a point of clarification. Because I was listening and I was trying to stay with you, and you said something as an aside there, and actually it's left my mind right now because I was so interested in what you were saying, but the bottom line is you said it came from the other side. So what did you mean when you said that it came from the other side?
Yes, well, that's right. Okay, well, here I am 32 years old, remembering being 10. So that memory was, as I say, normally people think of memory as a recording. But what I realized was it's not a recording, it's a connection. Mm-hmm. So if I'm now connected to that 10-year-old, it makes sense that the 10-year-old's connected to me. Because here's you and I now using this technology. I can hear you, you can hear me. Information is going back and forth between where I am and where you are, even though we're thousands of miles apart. Mm-hmm. So what I realized is memory is a connection. It's exactly the same thing. And so for the first time, I realized that's how it's possible, logically and reasonably, for a 10-year-old to have such a clear, vivid impression of being 32. It's because at
I got you.
32, I was building. I just said a couple minutes ago, I spent 60 days doing this meditation. During this same baseball game, the same summer, So that answered the question, how is it possible to get information from the future, is because thinking, memory is just a kind of thinking. So thinking is a connection. And that also answered the second question I had, which was, how do you become successful? Because of all the success principles I've been studying about, reading all the books, Think and Grow Rich and The Magic of Thinking Big and The Magic of Believing and all this kind of stuff, I realized that if you want to be successful, you have to have a goal. Nothing happens until you have a goal. And what's a goal? A goal is a destination in the future. So I realized that's what happens when you when you imagine your goal. People always say you have to do it in the present. You say things like, I am now earning this amount of money, or I'm now in this kind of a relationship. That's the point, that you put yourself mentally into that future time when you're enjoying your goals. And so the secret of success and the secret of mental time travel, as it's called, is the same thing. It's basically learning how to use your inner awareness to gather information from either the past or the future.
Now, when you say gather information from the future, the word gather implies that it's out there in the future, but it sounds like, in fact, what you've done is created it. I'm not trying to give you a hard time. I'm just trying to understand that principle, because in a way, it isn't gathering. It's that you're putting it out there and following it, in a sense. Am I right? Or what? Could you explain that, please?
Well, we have these great inventions now called drones, right? So if I had a drone right now, I could send a drone out into my neighborhood, and I could decide where that drone goes. And wherever it goes, it gathers information. It picks up images and maybe sounds, from where it goes. So the inner awareness, which I describe in my book, is the part that moves through time. It's the focus of your awareness. And we do it all the time. See, this is the thing. It's such a natural part of our thinking that we don't notice it. But if I were to ask you right now, and you could do this with your eyes closed even, imagine what's on the other side of the room. Or imagine what's in your living room. Imagine that you're in your living room and you're looking at your furniture. Well, you just call that a memory, right? But I believe that, in a sense, a part of your awareness goes there. Now, of course, if we're talking about your living room, it's no big deal. But if we're talking about a future, like a trip to Europe, or you're planning a summer vacation, then you put your mind there. You say, okay, I want to visit this place. I want to have this kind of food. I want to talk to these people, and there's a part of your mind that in a sense goes there. And of course, with more and more practice and more focus, you get more and more valid information.
And you actually create that reality.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's exactly the same as this thing that we're doing today. You see, I mean, we connected over the internet. I read something about you, and I think I sent an email to you, and you said, yeah, I'd like to talk to you. So we set up this appointment. Now here we are. Now this is a physical event. This is a physical event in the universe, and yet it started with a couple of ideas. What would happen if I emailed Dr. Parker and spoke with him? So that sort of what if question allows you to explore what you might call the possible future, and some of them connect and some of them don't,
So then, do you have a specific practice in the book, Anthony, that you recommend for a person to? It's kind of it's a guided imagery, and it's also at once a kind of self-realization of the potential that you have within.
Exactly right. I think it's it's a matter of degree, right? There's a book called Stumbling on Happiness, which you might have seen. It's by a professor from Harvard. He's a psychologist. His name is Dan Gilbert. He's got a very successful TED Talk. A lot of people have seen that TED Talk. And he says that what they've discovered now with the functional MRI, looking inside people's brains when they're thinking, is that the frontal lobe of the brain is a time machine. And that the default mode for people is to mentally time travel. And the name that we give it is daydreaming. So daydreaming is the most natural thing in the world, but focused, specific, ritualized daydreaming, which you might call goal setting, that becomes a whole different game where you imagine yourself in the future, you are enjoying your perfect lifestyle. And what happens over time, I believe, is that the neurons in your brain start to change. You've heard of neuroplasticity, of course. Mm-hmm. Your brain starts to develop. And this natural ability that we all have to get information from the past or the future just gets better and better and sharper, And successful people, I believe, every successful businessman, successful politician, successful athlete, they've stumbled upon this technique or this skill kind of by accident. Mm-hmm. But now we can practice it. So you can call it mindfulness or meditation or goal setting. All of those things together is really the key. And I outline in my book a whole series of exercises that people can do to exercise this part of their imagination.
So let's talk a little bit about some of those exercises, because you don't know this about me, Anthony, but I used to do a lot of meditation a long time ago. I did the martial arts, and I did Zen meditation. Got deeply into the whole transformational process of, the sword of no sword,
Exactly.
If you think of the sword, you draw it to you. If you have no sword, then you're free to engage appropriately.
Exactly.
And so I had all that going on and did a lot of, but the reason that's the background for this question is that I got educated in the direction of mindlessness as a part of meditation, having nothing in your mind. And so the issue for me as I'm inquiring about your thoughts is, do you actually start with a mindlessness and dissipate things, or do you actually just immediately go to the future in that process?
Well, what I use is what I call dynamic meditation. So I have a purpose for it, and essentially what I'm doing is I'm planning my day, or I'm planning my week, or I'm planning my year, And so any business person knows what I'm talking about. I mean, they have goals for the week, goals for the month, goals for the year. And it's just in the process of thinking about, using your imagination, daydreaming about those things in a really focused manner. Mm-hmm. And then another essential, I guess, would be keeping a journal, keeping mm-hmm. track of the thoughts. And I believe what happens is that when you do this meditation, or you do this ritualized thinking about what it is that you want, that triggers this part of your mind that's connected to the future to start giving you information. So we could call that intuition. And you're going to start noticing more thoughts. You might have dreams, you might have hunches, you might hear that still small voice within. So there's a real connection to being more and more clear about exactly what it is you want, and developing your intuition and your ability to use what you might call your psychic ability to get hunches and intuitions about what you should do to achieve your goals and dreams.
Okay, so another point of clarification then, you're not going necessarily to a fully realized place. That the process of meditation for you sounds like it's a place of evolution, that as you go into it, you begin to fully realize it in the smells, the touch, the surroundings, the reality of it, whereas in the beginning it's a thought, but as you get into it, it's not a thought, it's a reality. In the meditative state, it's a reality.
That's right. Now, I'll give you a perfect example of how it works. A few years ago, my niece got married. And like every bride, probably, she was planning that wedding for about 2 years in advance. I mean, she found Mr. Wonderful and she was going to marry this guy. And so over a period of time, she decided where she was going to have the ceremony, what kind of clothes she was going to wear, what kind of dresses the bridesmaids were going to wear, what music was going to be playing, what food they were going to serve. And, she got what she was planning. I mean, she had this really detailed plan laid out a year or so in advance. That's the process. Because she was interested in it, it was a goal, it was the biggest day of her life, Now, that's the kind of thing that anybody can do when they plan a meal for the weekend, like we had a party here. I had a birthday a few days ago, and my wife was planning the food and who we're going to bring, and we had to borrow some chairs from downstairs, to fit enough people in. So that's exactly the process that I'm talking about. So anybody can do it to plan a dinner party. Anybody uses this ability to plan a vacation or a holiday trip, but how many people plan 5 years, 10 years ahead? Not too many. About 3% in the research that I've done. About 3% of people do that, and these are the people that are the most successful people.
That is very interesting. Now, we're going to take a moment to take a break here, but I'm going to have a question that I'm going to preempt a little bit, give you a preemptive strike with me on this so you think about it when we take this break. Because those are very interesting concepts that you've raised that have to do with the realization of a future thought. I want to ask you this question. It's so positive and so affirmative what you're talking about. I wonder what could be done with an individual who's had some injury, who is working from a negative position, and how this practice might help them. So what we're going to do is take a break here, and we'll be back in just a moment after we hear a word about our sponsors.
Well, folks, you know as well as I do that psychiatric treatment failure, especially after multiple medication trials and those very, very brief hospitalizations, may prove insufficient to deal at home with the complexity of troubled children and those adolescents from 6 to 17 years old. Improved care, those next mandatory steps, should include a more comprehensive approach to address those multiple levels of challenges, from family to peers to school, diagnostically from defiance to depression, on every level for families, including military families internationally. The Barry Robinson Center's 32-acre open college-like campus in Norfolk, Virginia, provides safety and security and clean, comfortable living. How do we know? We refer folks over there all the time, strongly endorse what they're doing. So for further information, an informed interview, connect at this page, barryrobinson.org/core. Well, you folks already know that here at Core Brain Journal, we're on a mission to introduce you to resources that make significant contributions to the investigation of those predictable mind science applications. Our colleagues at DHA Lab Group provide a real difference with treatment options for people at every level, from first awareness of mind problems to those frustrating times when even well-informed treatment becomes surprisingly unpredictable. For my entire professional life, from psychoanalysis to brain scans, I've searched for, yes, improved predictability. The good news for all of us, from professionals to patients, remarkably effective research offers useful, cost-effective, organic options far beyond guesswork with psychiatric medications alone. DHA lab tests measure unbalanced biomedical details through easily available testing, now available globally for a variety of molecular answers from, for example, methylation, copper, and cryptopyrrole challenges. Check in for more details at dhalab.com core. That's dhalab.com/core.
Okay, so I'm told it only takes a few minutes to take that break, and we're back at it. So what we were talking about was not from an affirmative point, Anthony. We were talking about, what do we do? We have an interest here at Core Brain Journal in individuals who've been traumatized.
Right.
So you're talking about a very positive point, and naturally we have listeners who can take some value from that, who are interested in rebranding themselves, where they're going to go, what they're going to do with their lives. That's affirmative. But let's take a moment to walk down the somewhat traumatic lane, the challenging lane the stressful lane where somebody's been pushed into a closet or had some horrible things happen to them. How does your practice work with individuals who've been bounced hard on the road of life?
Well, this is something I'm very interested in too, Chuck. And there's a fellow in Canada here that his name is Rick Hansen. I don't know whether you know him or not, but he's a very famous Canadian. He was riding in the back of a pickup truck when he was 16 years old. The truck had an accident. He was thrown off the truck and broke his back. So he's been paralyzed now for the last 40 or 50 years. I'm not quite sure how old he is now, but anyway, he decided at one point that he was going to take a wheelchair around the world. And he did. He went all around the world in a wheelchair, visited 85 countries or something like that. And he's one of the leading advocates in Canada for making things available to people that are in wheelchairs, like changing buildings and that sort of thing, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But when you talk to him, and I used to work in the same building as him when I was working at UBC in Vancouver, he says, for the first 2 or 3 years after this accident, he just wanted to kill somebody. He was so angry and so frustrated. Why me? Why did this happen to me? But eventually he got to accept it. And then the question became, how can I use this experience to help other people and live a better life? And so we talked a minute ago about gathering information, right? So if you ask yourself a question like, how could this possibly be a positive thing? And you asked yourself that question and you meditated on that question, or you asked yourself that question 5 or 10 minutes a day, you would get all kinds of thinking, all kinds of ideas about how this experience that you've been through could be a positive experience. And who knows, it might take you 3 months or 6 months or a year before you started to see the positive aspect of it. But eventually it would, you would notice it. And I think if you think about some of the people that you've been working with, you'll recognize what I'm talking about, that eventually people have to get to the point where this experience they've been through is either going to destroy them, or they just have to incorporate it into their personality and do the best they can with it, And so asking yourself a simple question like that, how could this be a positive thing? How could this be a good thing? As difficult as that question might be, eventually they will see the positive side of it. And that's the starting point. Once you start to change what I call change the past, change the meaning of it, you can't change the event. Rick Hansen is still paralyzed, but he's become a real advocate for people with disabilities in Canada and all around the world too.
So he's turned it around. He's reframed his life.
He's reframed his life. And of course, all kinds of people that have done the same thing, right? Whether they're veterans or whether they're, people that were damaged in accidents or fires. There's some amazing stories of recovery that we've all heard. And basically people just have to find the positive in it. And it's up to us individually to do that, because nobody can do it for us,
Well, it's so much of what we see happen in therapy, Anthony. We see the successful therapists, in my opinion, having known a number of therapists and being in the business for as many years as I've been in the business, what happens is we see people, the most successful therapists have a positive attitude. They themselves have a positive attitude. Something is going to happen here in a positive way. The most unsuccessful, the people who have not good reputations, are negative and diminishing individuals, and they have a burr up their saddle on a regular basis. They're snorting at meetings. And, who wants to talk to them on any level besides actually healing?
Exactly. One of my best friends in Victoria here is a fellow named Peter. When he was 29 years old, he's now 60. When he was 29 years old, he was running a marathon and he fell down. Couldn't figure out why. Turns out he had a brain tumor.
Mm.
And in the last 30 years, he's had about 5 different operations because this tumor just keeps growing in his brain. And this guy is one of the most positive people you're ever going to meet because he just decided he was going to live a good life in spite of what happened to him, and he's had to relearn how to speak, how to walk, how to talk 3 or 4 times in the last 30 years. And he's just an amazing guy. So something that I'm very interested in, and I would love it if any of your colleagues would be interested in trying something like this with me. I have an exercise which I talk about in my book. I teach it to almost everybody that I know. I've taught it to people in their 80s. I've taught it to kids in grade 2. It's simple. Everybody loves it. And what I call it is making a past successes list.
Say that a little bit. You broke up a little bit right there. Say it again, please.
Yeah. It's a simple exercise where you take a sheet of paper and you write down what I call your past successes.
Okay.
And so your past successes could be getting a high school diploma, learning how to drive, finding a perfect relationship, learning to play chess. It doesn't have to be a big thing. So you have a list of things that you consider to be successes in your life. And what you do is you meditate on those. You think about those. Close your eyes and just go back there in your mind and get that feeling in your body that you're a success, that was a successful thing for you to do. There's something very special about the feeling of winning, being a successful person. And so what I believe after doing this now for decades is that feeling of success affects your emotions. It affects your brain, I believe. And what happens is your set point, your happiness set point, simply over time increases. And because your brain and your body are connected, then of course you're going to start seeing things that are more positive. You're going to start to talk to yourself in a more positive way. You're going to see things that other people might consider to be problems. You're going to see them as opportunities. So I think that over time, your happiness and success set point, your positive attitude set point is going to shift. And that's obviously what's happened to these people that you're talking about that are positive.
That's so interesting. So you started that little part of the conversation by saying something about getting colleagues together and working on this. Did you have a thought about a feedback loop? Where were you going with that idea?
Well, I just think as an experiment, as a practice, it'd be fun to do if there were some people that or yourself perhaps, just, get people to try this little past successes list experiment, where you make a list of past successes, you read it over once a day, you think about it, and the main thing is you get that feeling back in your body. You really feel what it feels like to be happy and successful, which we've all felt in the past.
So, I'm sorry.
No, so that's what I was going to say. And, as you become more familiar with that, you can feel successful anytime you want just by reading that list. And I believe that has an effect on your whole mind-brain system, and you will feel more positive and more successful easier.
It's an interesting contradistinction to what we do so often in therapy now.
Exactly.
Because it's the whole pathologizing thing. Where's the problem? Where are we going? How did the problem occur? The problem must be there. I can't see it, but I know there's a problem. I know there's some trauma. I know there's some pain. I'm going to stay with the trauma and the pain. And then I'm going to try to not only figure out my pain and my trauma in that, but why did that person have their trauma and their pain? Why did they do it to me? So then I'm into that whole negative construct and what was going on with their mother, with them when they were kids. And it just goes, it's like a doggone dirty river going down the stream.
Exactly. Well, I believe that that's exactly the wrong approach. And what I say in my book is that that's a Newtonian concept, looking for the cause. Well, what Einstein has taught us now is that the cause can be in the future. So in other words, looking back to my niece again, who was planning her wedding, you might say that the reason that she chose that location, chose the music, chose the food, chose the color of those dresses is because she was imagining the future that she wanted. And that information was traveling from the past, the same as memories, travel from the past. That information about her goal was traveling from the future and inspiring her to make decisions. So she was making the decisions in the present based on the information she was getting from the future. So it's understandable that psychiatry and psychology that started, 150 years ago or so, right in the middle of the Newtonian paradigm, they focus on looking for the cause. But hey, who cares what the cause is, If you want to be happier, remember when you felt happy, make your past successes list, and your happiness will grow in the present. And your attitude will shift, and the meaning of your past experiences will shift too.
Well, I personally think that's very true. Take a moment, though, to just for our audience, you and I were offline talking about physics and time and a little bit before we actually started the recorded conversation. But just take a moment to tell our audience about the Einsteinian reference. I think everybody's going to get the Newtonian linear quality of that. But I think the next question is, when you made that reference to Einstein and the future, could you just elaborate on that physical concept there, if you don't mind?
Well, I think everybody is familiar with the idea that Einstein used this expression, space-time. He said there is no space and there is no time. There's really this sort of four-dimensional matrix. And he said that there's no distinction between the past, the present, or the future, except for your point of view. And a part of that, one of the corollaries to that idea is that a cause for an event can be in the future. So, for example, and I mean, a simple way that I understand it is, let's say, for example, you had an appointment after work, so you leave work one day and you think, oh, I gotta visit this person across town. So you imagine going to that appointment across town, and that causes you to drive a certain street that you normally maybe wouldn't drive, and then you may have an accident, right? So that, you could say that the accident was caused in some part by the future. It's also caused by the past. In other words, where you start from is one factor, but where you're going is another factor, and where you end up, of course, is in the middle where you have the accident, right? So the idea that the cause for a present event can be at least partially in the future is part of Einstein's whole space-time revolutionary concept. And so that's what I'm talking about, And that's where intuition and hunches and things, I believe, come from too.
Because there's a certain measure of connection with the future.
Because your mind is equally connected to the past and the future. Dr. Endel Tulving, who you might have heard about, he was a world-renowned expert on memory. When he started using the MRI to look inside people's brains as they were remembering, he got to recognize what memory looks like on an MRI. And then he was doing these experiments with people, the traditional things, giving them a list of words and having them remember them and stuff like that. And he would say, okay, take a break and we'll do another test in a few minutes. And when the people weren't remembering, when they were just relaxing, he looked at the MRI and he said, hey, I recognize that thought pattern as a memory. So he asked the people, what were you doing in our break there where we were in between memory tests? And the person might say something like, oh, I was just imagining this dinner party that I'm doing on the weekend. And so Tulving started to recognize, and he was the one that coined the term future memory, because he recognized that whatever memory is, it works in the future the same as it works in the past.
That's very interesting. I haven't heard that reference, and I'm going to look it up and put it in the show notes so everybody can get it. And how do you spell his last name? Tulving. He worked at Harvard and the U of T. I believe he's retired now, but he was one of the foremost experts in memory. He worked on memory for decades. A lot of scientific papers. I'm sure a lot of your listeners will be familiar with his work. Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, we're running out of time here a little bit. This has been a very, very interesting conversation, even though we had our trips and bumps on the beginning. My own inexperience with doing the sponsor thing, we really got into it and really had a very interesting conversation. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
What I want to do is make sure we have an opportunity for people to get hooked up with you. I mean, your website, if you'll mention that, and then if you have any other things that you'd like to talk about, how a person could get tied up with you, because you do some coaching. And, one of the things we're very interested in is providing opportunities for people to connect with people like you. Mm-hmm. So if you have a easy way to do that, please let us know.
Sure. Well, my book is called Mind, Time, and Power. It's available all over the world on Amazon. Mm-hmm. And if people go to my website, mindtimeandpower.com, so mind, time, and power is all one word. Mm-hmm. So mindtimeandpower.com, they can connect with me there. They can get a copy of the book, either the hard copy or the Kindle version, And if they need coaching or they want to talk to me about it, I'm perfectly able to do that. I coach people through the internet all the time. And I remember your assistant Tiffany asked me when we first connected if I was able to offer a prize for somebody, and some of your listeners. So I suggested that I would be more than happy to offer a copy of my book to anybody who wants to write into you, and you can choose the winner, and I'll send them a copy of my book.
Well, that's very kind of you. Now, thank you for mentioning that. Somehow, in all the falderall in the beginning, I just missed that. I'm looking back and seeing the note that I missed. And, that's very kind of you. So, folks, what we do in this situation, and just so you know, Anthony, mm-hmm. we keep it open for about 2 weeks from the time this is published. So, and there's a link in there. A person goes in and leaves their name and their email and so on and so forth. Then we have a drawing internally. And then we send you the reference on the person and give it back to you that way, so that person can. And it sounds like a terribly interesting book. I mean, it's just one of these things where you're talking about some things that are so absolutely relevant in terms of where mental health itself, as on a more global phenomenon, needs to get unstuck, because the whole concept of mental health, so much of it is pathology, past, and stuckness in the past, and negative and pathologizing, and not where do we go with ourselves in the future. It's just like we have two different sections of what's going on, and it's almost, if you're talking about the future in mental health, you're completely wacky. What are you talking about? And you might as well go home somewhere. You're not a functional human being, because we're stuck in this process of pathology and past.
Well, that's right. And, there is a movement now, it's growing all the time, of positive psychology, where people have started to study what do successful people do to be happy and successful. And basically it comes down to having a positive attitude, right? And mm-hmm. so there's a lot of books now. I mean, if you go to the library, there's no shortage of books on, the happiness project, or Dr. Gilbert's book Stumbling on Happiness is one, and The Brain That Changes Itself, I guess, is another popular book. But basically, I think this is the future of, well, I guess in the large picture, it's the future of human evolution, but certainly in terms of mental health, we need more and more people talking about how can we be happier? What does it take to just cheer ourselves up? I mean, the pharmaceutical industry has had, been doing a land office business for the last 50 years, selling drugs and basically keeping people trapped in their neuroses. I think it's time that we help people break free from that and just learn to be happy and feel happy and enjoy ourselves in the present. And I think some of these simple exercises, like the ones I have in my book, can go a long way towards helping people do that.
Well, I completely agree with you, and it's really so affirmative listening to you, so encouraging, and I think people like you really need to be heard out. I'm just so glad that you took the time to come on to the program here and and really share your thoughts with our listeners. I think it's very constructive, and it's affirmative. We've had a couple of other people on, which I'll list in the show notes, that you would be interested in as well, who are on the same path and have a somewhat different angle on the whole thing. But this is great, because this is what we need to do. This is where we're going, no question about it.
Well, it's been a real pleasure for me too, Chuck, and I want to thank you for getting in touch with me, and allowing me to be a part of this broadcast, because I think you're doing exactly the right thing, and it's a pleasure for me to be with you today.
Well, thank you very much, sir. So if something comes up along the way, you have another idea, hey, Parker, we need to talk about this, just give us a call and let us know. We'll get out and we'll do it. So we'd be happy to talk to you again sometime.
Absolutely, Chuck. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Anthony. Have a great day, man.
You too.
Thanks for listening to Core Brain Journal. We're working every day behind the scenes to bring you reports that connect research benches with those street trenches. Here we share the complexity of mind science because, as you know, details really do matter. One of the most pervasive, misunderstood challenges is how commonplace medications, like those written for ADHD, are used so regularly without clear guidelines. If you think you'd like more specifics, take a minute to download my 2-page PDF packed with video links and references on the absolute essentials of how to start ADHD medications. They're easily available at corebrainjournal.com/start. Thanks for listening. Do connect and stay tuned. Together we can make a difference.